name of the Shiur tonight is What's in a Name? Shinui HaShem, Hows and Wherefores. The reason I got interested in this, this has sort of been one of these black holes of halacha, as far as when we do a Shinui HaShem, when we change someone's name in halacha for a sick person. I got a call several weeks ago from a gentleman whose mother-in-law was quite ill. And he said, it was suggested that perhaps we should do a Shinui HaShem. We should change her name, because he had heard the very famous tradition that when you change the name of the person, you can change potentially their mazel, you can change something about them, and that could affect the refuah. In the course of the conversation, it turned out that his mother-in-law was 95 years old. And his thinking was, if we do it for someone who's younger, why not do it for someone who's older? Sounded reasonable when I thought about it. And so this got me thinking about when is it appropriate to do Shinui HaShem? Why are there some communities that have a much stronger tradition to go for a Shinui HaShem, and why certain communities have a tradition not as strong to do a Shinui HaShem? Do you know anyone who's had a Shinui HaShem?
Yes.
Yeah, it happens all the time. Usually we do it for someone who is, let's say, younger and facing a perilous situation, God forbid, Rahman al-Islam, cancer or something to that effect, or in a serious accident. Those are the kinds of situations where you do Shinui HaShem. And it's actually, in my rabbinical madrich, my RCA madrich, it has the Shinui HaShem ceremony. It doesn't really provide much detail, this madrich. It just says that if a person is seriously ill, it's customary to change that person's name. And you're supposed to get a minyan together, you do it in front of a Sefer Torah, and there are some traditions that have you actually open up the Sefer Torah, and the first name of one of the avos or imahos that you come by in the reading of the Sefer Torah is the name that you choose. That's one way of doing it. And you can see in the text of the Shinui HaShem ceremony in the Madrich that that's one of the ways of doing it. Sort of like leave it up to the Ribono Shel Olam to choose the name. And another way of doing it is to add a name that implies some kind of refuah or life. You say Rafael or Chaim or Yosef, something like that. And for a woman it would be Chaya or Chava, something like that. Yes? Okay, so those are the basic outlines that probably we've all heard of before. But what's the source of this sort of nebulous tradition, halacha, minhag, whatever we're going to call it? Where does it come from? So the original source is from a Gemara in Rosh Hashanah. It's V'amar Rebbe Yitzchak, Arba Dvarim Mekarin Gzardino Shel Adam. There are four things that tear up a decree against a person from Shamayim. Eluhain, tzedakah, se'aka, they are giving charity, calling out to Hashem, which we learn as tefillah, right? Tshuva, tefillah, and tzedakah is what we say, but it's based on the Yerushalmi. But the Bavli version is tzedakah, se'aka, Shinui HaShem, v'Shinui Maisa. Changing the name and changing your deeds, which would be considered Shinui Maisa, that would be tshuva. So we say tshuva, tefillah, tzedakah, based on Yerushalmi, and we don't have in our liturgy that we focus so much on the Yomim Noraim, we don't talk about Shinui HaShem. Shinui HaShem, where did we get this idea from? I'm just skipping a couple lines in the Gemara. D'chsiv Sarah ishtecha lo sikra es shema Sarai ki Sarah shema, like we saw in last week's Parsha, that it's no longer appropriate to call her Sarai, but rather call her Sarah. As a result of her having a changed name, I will bless her and give her a child. So we see that whatever Gzar Din had been placed upon Sarai was not the same Gzar Din that was placed upon Sarah, and that's why the newly named lady, newly named matriarch, the wife of Abraham, was able to bear a child, even though Sarai couldn't, but Sarah could. Interestingly, in the Chuvas Harash, he has a slightly different girsa of the Gemara, and he quotes it as, and he has the tshuva that the Rush has is Ba'adam Echad Shehemir Aviv Lidasi Shme'elim. He was asked the following question. You had a Yid who's a Fruma guy, but his father became a Muslim. And so he's embarrassed that he should be called up to the Torah by the name of his father, who's now, Muhammad instead of being Moshe, or whatever it is. So he says, V'haya shmo Yosef ben Shimon. So his name was Yosef ben Shimon. V'achar shehimer aviv hiniach shem aviv v'kar shmo Yosef ben Shmuel. So he changed his father's name in order so that he shouldn't have any connection anymore with his father. So, and then the problem is, okay, fine, who cares how he's called up to the Torah? The guy's going to get an aliyah one way or the other. There are nafkaminas as far as Shinui HaShem, as far as Gerushin. So therefore we find some of the halachos of Shinui HaShem in Even HaEzer, because what taka is this person's true identity for halachic documents? The most important, most serious one, the one with the most serious repercussions is a get. So what are we going to do? So therefore, liyamim giresh is ishto ba'oser shem hachadash v'chshiru haget. So he divorced his wife, and in the get they put down Yosef ben Shmuel, which was the name that he made up for his father. Right? So the question is the get kosher? And the rabbi said the get was kosher. So the Rosh says, I don't agree. He says, Tama ani ala machshirin afim yuchal adam l'shano shemo v'likro shem acher. He says, even if we'll grant you that a person is allowed to change his name in the course of changing his gzar din kidam rinan, and here's the girsa that the Rosh has, shlosha dvar mivat l'mishak zeira v'chulei v'yesh omri ma'shinui Hashem. So the Rosh's girsa of our Gemara would certainly explain that even according to the Bavli, our nusach of the tefillah of tshuva, u'shuva, tefillah, tzedakah, ma'avir Yisrael ha'gzeira is a correct girsa because it's only 3, and then some people add Shinui HaShem. But the Rosh's problem in this particular case is you can change your name, but how can you change your father's name? Your father's name is his name. You can't, I can't change him. Right? So, Aval Shem Aviv Heich Yochol Lishanos. V'haroim Haget V'kasav Bo Yosef ben Shmuel Yomer Eina Meguresh Shem Baila Yosef ben Shimon. He says, I don't see how you could be machshir this get. He says, people are going to look at this get, they're going to say, hey, this woman's divorced from a guy whose name is Yosef ben Shmuel. We don't know such a guy, but she's still married to you because you're Yosef ben Shimon. Anyway, that's a side issue. But the point is that you see there's an interesting variant girsa of this Gemara. The question that I'd like to raise, at least one of the questions that I want to raise is, how does it work? Is it magic? New name, no one knows me anymore. Whatever decree they had in me from Shemayim doesn't affect me anymore because I'm a different person, I have a new name. So what is it? How does it work? There's a rational approach, and there's a supernatural approach. Okay, there's a rational approach, which is that of the Rambam and the Meiri, and other Rishonim. Let's take a look at the Rambam and the Ran. Let's take a look at their approach to how this tradition works. The Rambam in Hilchos Tshuva and Perek Beis writes in source number 4. He says, "Midarchei hatshuva lios hashav tzoek tamid lifnei Hashem bebechi ubesachanunim." A person who wants to do tshuva has to constantly be crying out before God with tears and with supplications. The osef tzedakah kifi kocho. He has to do as much tzedakah, give as much tzedakah as he can. Umisrachek harbi min hadavar shechatavo, and he's got to do the tshuva process by distancing himself from the sin. Umishana shmo, and he changes his name. So what does the Rambam? What does that mean according to the Rambam that he changes his name? Kolomar ani acher ve'eni oso ha'isha osa osan hama'asim. I'm not the same person that did those deeds. What does that mean according to the Rambam? This is a psychological affirmation that the reason for changing your name for the Rambam, who's the ultimate rationalist, right, is that you want to try and express both to yourself and to the Ribono Shel Olam that I'm a rehabilitated person, I'm a changed person. The person who committed those averos in the past, that wasn't me. I'm a new person. So it's a completely rational, psychological affirmation of I'm doing tshuva. It's a component of tshuva for the Rambam. Do you see that? I hope I'm not reading too much into the Rambam, but I believe, and that seems to be the way, the Ran says it even more explicitly, the Meiri says it explicitly in that way as well. So there's nothing magical that's taking place according to the Rambam. Is that clear? You understand?
Is it any different from what the Gemara is saying? Because so you're basically saying it's a different person. So here it's in the context of tshuva. In the other one, it's in the context of a gzer. The gzer was on ploini ben ploini, so now I'm a different person.
The difference is is it a metaphysical phenomenon or is it a psychological phenomenon? Is it a component of tshuva that I want to just affirm that I'm a rehabilitated individual, but be'etzem, nothing ontological, nothing in reality has changed in the cosmos, right? I'm the same guy, but my behavior has changed. And in order to express that rehabilitation, I change my name.
And in the Gemara's context?
We don't know. The Gemara is ambiguous. The Rambam is learning it in a rational context.
So according to a rational approach, Shinui HaShem wouldn't be effective on a person in a coma.
Oh, okay. So this is an excellent point. All right. So this is what we want to try and get to. Okay. This is the issue. Okay. So excellent point. The issue is, according to the Rambam, it's completely ineffective to do Shinui HaShem in order to affect some kind of metaphysical, supernatural transformation to change a gzar din if the person himself or herself is not even conscious that the Shinui HaShem is being performed. Okay? So there is, however, another approach. And by the way, the Rambam learns the whole idea of changing your makom, of Shinui makom, which is another thing that the Gemara talks about elsewhere. The Rambam says, Umeshana ma'asav, he should change his deeds. That's what the other thing that the Gemara had said. That what means kulan latova, ulederach yeshara, v'golam imakom. He should also change his place. Shegolos mechaperes avam mipnei shegoremes al lihikona v'lihios anav u'shval ruach. Again, changing your place is not a metaphysical transformation, but it has a psychological effect. When you go from one place to another, it humbles you. It causes you to feel, humility and that you're not gonna go back to your evil ways. Okay. So comes along the Yerushalmi, and the Yerushalmi in Masechet Shabbos Perek Vav says as follows: Rabbi Yochanan hava avar b'shuka. Rabbi Yochanan was once walking through the shuk. Chama chad mazbin min ilei maltuma. He once saw a person selling candies, and it was a delicacy item, which didn't seem to Rabbi Yochanan to be something that you could make a parnasa from. So Amar lei min eilein at chaye. He says, you can make a living off of selling candy? So Amar lei in. The guy told him, yeah, I can make a living selling candy. So Shavkei va'azalei. So Rabbi Yochanan went on his way. Basar sha'a avar gadei. An hour later, or sometime later, the merchant catches up with Rabbi Yochanan. Amar lai Rav Tzali iluye de min hahishaita lo zavnis klum. He says, Rebbe, please daven for me, because from the time that you asked me that question, I wasn't able to sell one item. Apparently, Rabbi Yochanan maybe had contempt for this delicacy. People should just buy candies, pasnish, whatever. Yeah, not pashkis, pasnish. Yeah. So anyway, so maybe that's why he changed the guy's mazel and didn't allow it. The guy couldn't sell anymore. So he says, Rebbe, daven for me. So va'amar lei sheni asrach pa'amim sheshinei Hashem gorim pa'amim sheshinei hamakom gorim. So Rabbi Yochanan says, you know what? Move. You should move. You should move your place. Move from one place to another. He says, because sometimes Shinui HaShem causes a person's mazel to change, and sometimes Shinui Makom causes a person's mazel to change. So this is where we get the famous phrase, Meshana Makom, Meshana Mazel. Right? It comes from this Yerushalmi, right? Okay, so it sounds like, from this Yerushalmi, that it is a metaphysical issue. Was this guy, this candy merchant, was he a sinner? He didn't do anything wrong. We don't see that he did anything wrong. For whatever reason, Rabbi Yochanan's pronouncement changed the guy's mazel, and he needed a bracha. So Rabbi Yochanan says, you want a bracha, change your name or change your place. So you see, there is something more than just, it's not a tshuva component. It seems to be like it's its own thing, according to the Yerushalmi. It could be. I mean, I'm not saying for sure. I'm just saying that it would seem that there's something else going on in this Gemara. But if you, I would imagine that the Rambam would probably have to find a way to explain this from a rational standpoint, yes?
The rational standpoint is psychological.
Yeah, it would be like a psychological thing that by changing your place, you'll have renewed spirit, you'll have a new start, and so forth.
What does it mean, Mazal Yisrael? Israel is above the Mazal.
Well, that's a Gemara in Shabbos, and it has to be understood in its proper context. When we say Ein Mazal Yisrael, it means that the Jewish people have the ability to transcend their Mazal. It doesn't mean that we're not at all guided by the constellations, because if we were completely not guided by constellational, astrology, then why would we not engage in Dinei Torah in the month of Av and look to engage in Dinei Torah in the month of Adar? So we know that there is some aspect of Mazel that in other words, we don't want to tempt the stars, but at the same time, we have to have confidence that we can transcend the stars. Okay? So the Ritva also seems to equivocate on this issue. And the Ritva in source number 6 says, Arba'a dvar mekarin gzardino shel adam. When he talks about this Gemara, he talks about the 4 things that tear a person's gzardin. He says, Pirush, first he learns like the Rambam and the Ran, that Pirush Shinui HaShem, Shemishana Shemo, She'eno ha'ish ba'al ha'averos, Kedei shelo yazkiruhu l'ra. He changes his name to say that I'm not the original guy who was the sinner. I'm a new person. I don't want to be reminded of my past. I'm trying to make a clean break from my past. It's the psychological aspect. But then he says, Ubar mehachi, he says, but in addition to that, he says, the batal v'nafik me'itztagninus delay kederach sha'amar be'avraham. That he's departing from his astrology. He's departing from his sort of astrological fate or destiny, that, like HaKadosh Baruch Hu, like he's quoting from the Gemara, that when Hashem told Avram that he was going to change his name from Avram to Avram, he said, the astrological forecast for Avram is that he doesn't have children. But for Avraham, that person will have children. So you see that there is this metaphysical thing. Because when you think about it, Avram and Sarah, their lack of children was not due to, they weren't changing their name in order to rehabilitate themselves in some way, the way that the Rambam seems to be learning. So if we're getting our source from Abraham and Sarah, it would seem that there is some kind of metaphysical phenomenon that is taking place when you change your name. One of the earliest sources for the ceremony of Shinui HaShem is from Rabbeinu Yerucham in the 14th century, one of the Rishonim. And apparently it was well known and documented even from the times of the Gaonim, as we see from the language of Rabbeinu Yerucham in source number 7. He says, Shinui HaShem, and this is in his Sefer, told us Adam V'chava, Nesib Chavches. He writes as follows, Shinui HaShem Sha'osim L'chola. He says, when we change a sick person's name, and you notice, by the way, before we go any further, let me just point out, when Chazal speak in the terms of the Gemara, they don't speak in terms specifically of a chayla. They say any person who wants to make a break from their past can change their name. It's a method of tshuva. It's a method of breaking a gezar din. But then you come to the Rishonim and we see that it seems like it's something that's reserved for cholim. It's reserved for sick people. How that change took place, we'll talk about in a few minutes. So, Shinui HaShem sha'osin l'chola ba'avur sha'amru chazal ki echad mehadvarim shemakarin gezardinu shel adam hu Shinui HaShem. So he says that's the reason. He says it's because one of the reasons that breaks a person's gezar din is changing his name. Pirush, and that means ein ze ploni ki acherhu. This is not the same person. Ulefichach nagu l'chola mesukan l'shanos shemo. And that's why the minhag is for a sick person to change his name. V'zeu shinoi shetiknu ha'go'inim zal. And this is the order. This is the way it's supposed to be done. And this is Rabbeinu Yerucham is one of the first to really document in its completeness what the ceremony is. And this, he says, it's from the times of the Gaonim, which is post-Talmudic, but at the same time pre-Rishonim. Okay, so he says, Boin Yud B'nei Adam, 10 guys get together. You have a minyan. Ubaki Shebahem Ochei Sefer Torah Biyadav. And the leader of them, I guess the Rav or the biggest Talmud Chacham among them, holds the Sefer Torah. Va'omer mitzale in anachna ad hu yismole rachamin ilana ve'al achana ve'al kol amo Yisrael ve'al rosh hachola hazeh. Now apparently there was a text that it was already known, because he just says that we are praying, etc., and you say the words until may God be filled with compassion upon us and on our brethren and on all of Israel and on the head of this sick person, v'yikayim osa l'refuah shalema u'l'chayim tovim, and may God give him a complete refuah and good life, v'yikarei shemo ploni, and then you give him his new name. Yismach, and by the way, let me just point something else out. Shinui HaShem. What do we do today? Do we do Shinui HaShem or do we do Hosafas HaShem? We add a name. So our practice today seems to be different from what was done in the times of the Rishonim. Because, and it's important to sort of note this, the Aruch HaShulchan makes an important note of this in Hilchas Gittin. We probably won't have a chance to look at that tonight. In Hilchas Gittin, there's a whole procedure about how to write a person whose name had changed. And the reason why you have to write it in a certain way is because he was previously known with one name. His name used to be Ruvain, and now his name is Shimon. So you have to write what he was previously known as and what he's known as now. But, says the Aruch HaShulchan, if a person had Shinui HaShem, where there was only Hosafas HaShem, where he retains his original name Ruvain, and now we call him, let's say, Ruvain Yosef, or Chaim Ruvain. So then, that whole protocol of how you're supposed to write a get is different. You don't have to be so medactic in mentioning that he used to be known just as Ruvain, because you are retaining his original name. Okay, let's just keep that in mind. But over here the language is that we're completely transforming his name. Now, it seems that the reason for this difference of minhag is because, and this is a whole different shiur. This is a whole different shiur. But it used to be that the practice was only to give a person one name. And that's clear from in the times of the Gemara, you only had one name. There are very few people in the Gemara, almost no one. And with rare exception, no one in the Gemara has more than one name, at least one biblical name, right? And maybe he'll be called, so-and-so, the so-and-so, like Rabbi Yossi Hassandler, right? Because he's the cobbler, right? But the name is only one name. At some point in our history, and that has to be documented carefully, people started utilizing multiple names. Now we have 2 names, some people have 3 names, I've even heard 4 names, right? Oh, 4 names. It's a gabai's nightmare. Call up a guy with 4 names and then you have to do a Shinui HaShem. So, name your children wisely. Anyway, so the Yikarei Shemo Ploni, his name shall be called Ploni. So, Yismach Bishmo L'Refuah Shalema, may he rejoice with his new name for a complete refuah. K'dichsiv va'agadelosh shemecha v'heyei baracha. And then we quote the pasuk that God blesses Avraham. U'chesiv v'lo yikarei oda shimcha Avram v'hayu shimcha Avraham ki av hamon goyim nesaticha. And God, just like God changed Avraham's name for the better, so too should this guy's name be changed. Yehi ratzon milefanecha Hashem Elokeinu v'Elokei Avosenu sheyehi shmo levatel me'olav kol gezeros kashos v'ra'os. May his new name nullify all evil decrees. Likroa gezardinu me'olav ume'al kol asher lo, and to tear the evil decree from him and from anything that is associated with him. V'im niknasa misa al ploni zeh lo niknasa misa al ploni zeh lo niknasa. And if there was a decree of death, it's not on this guy whose new name is Ploni, whose new name is Shimon, whatever. And if there was an evil decree, then it wasn't on this guy, this new guy, Ploni. The ish acherhu, he's a completely new person. Uchebriya chadashahu, he's like a new creation. Uchekatan shenolad l'chaim toivim v'la'arichus shanim, and he's like a child who has been newly born for good life and for long days. Ulamilo yamim, and for a length of days. Ulakayim bo mikra shakasuv lo yihiyeh shum ol yamim v'zakein asher lo yamala yes yamav, and may it be fulfilled in him that there shall be within Israel only people who live a full life. Va'omer shamati es tfilascha re'isi dimascha hineni rofe'echa b'yom hashlishi tala beis Hashem yisam. Okay, another pasuk talking about the skula for refuah. Yerasam elofanecha Hashem Elokeinu v'Elokei Avosenu shetishlach refuah shlema leploni zeh. Mehera litzdaka v'lischus v'lischadesh neurim l'chadesh masin toivim lechol ha'olam hazav limchol ha'olam haba l'malos ritzoncha v'limso cheftcha v'limso chen beinecha l'hodos l'cha u'leverecha shemecha ki tov v'omer baruchi nafshi es Hashem v'al tishkachi kol gemulav atischadesh kenesher neuraychi v'omer yadul Hashem chazdo v'gomer v'yizbuchu zivchei toda u'mevarich ha'chola baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam ha'gomel l'chayavim tovos. So this is a whole long protocol that is discussed by Rabbeinu Yerucham. I'm not really sure the evolutionary process of how we get from this very lengthy ceremony to the very short ceremony that's in my madrich. But there must have been other traditions about Shinui HaShem. But nevertheless, the consensus is that what this does is it changes the person essentially, regardless of whether he's done tshuva or not. So the Maharsha tries to sort of mitigate this divide between the rational approach and the supernatural approach. And if you take a look in the Maharsha, he tries to suggest that both are true, that it depends who you're dealing with. Okay, so take a look at the Maharsha on Rosh Hashanah. He says, "V'nireh who was the author of this? Rabbi Yitzchak. The Rabbi Yitzchak l'taimei. The Amar la'el yafet sa'aka la'adam ben koidem gzar din ben la'achar gzar din." I'm reading in source number 8 in the Maharsha. I'm on the second line. He says, "It would seem to me that Rabbi Yitzchak holds that prayer is effective whether you call out to Hashem before or after. Umaisi gabe tzedakah medichsiv tzedakah tatzil mimaves. Dahainu gam im nigzar la'adam misa tzedakah tatzil lanu mimenu. V'chein b'tzedakah dichsiv mitzukosei yatzilei mitzuka mashma gzar din v'chein shinoi ma'isa hainu tshuva medichsiv bayar elokim es ha'ma'aseim kishavu. Ve'elu hagimel yastan ha'payit tshuva tfilu tzedakah mavinus roa ha'gezera." So basically, up until now, the Maharsha has said that these three things, tshuva, tefillah, and tzedakah, are the first three things. But the fourth thing is what we really have to focus our attention on, says the Maharsha. Aval Shinui HaShem v'Shinui Makom l'divrei yesh omrim lo zachran hapaitan. He says this was not mentioned by the poets, by the liturgists who gave us our tefillah. Shehem gam kein ma'avirin ha'gezera kedeka amar hacha. But these things also change a person's gzar din. So the Maharsha asks the question, why did our liturgists not include these? Ulufum rihata ikol meimar bazeh delo zachar hapaitan ela elu gimel roa hagezera shabo lechapara al gzera shaba bishvil chet. One answer could be, is that simple understanding is that tshuva, tefillah, and tzedakah are things that a person does to correct and atone for sin. Masha'en kein shinei Hashem v'shinei makom delo bo l'shanus hagzera shaba al chet. He says, but changing your name and changing your place are not coming to change a gezerah to help you rehabilitate yourself from sin. Dahashinei Hashem misara yalef v'shinei hamakom me'Avraham. He says, where do we learn this out from? We learn it out from Sarah. We learn out Shinei Makom from Avraham. So you see that it's not an issue of sinfulness that is sort of rehabilitated through these actions, because Avraham and Sarah were not sinners. Lav mishum chet tziva l'shano shem Sarah u'makom de Avraham. It's not because of sin that God told Sarai to change her name to Sarah. It's not because of sin that God told Avraham to go from Ur Kasdim to Canaan. He says, v'chein kosav bal, I don't know what this abbreviation is, v'zel Lashona. One of the Rishonim writes as well, mihu shinui Hashem v'shinei hamakom lo matzinam l'ukmei ela b'mishek zeiraso b'lichet ki b'hishtanos chulei. He says that these things, shinei Hashem and shinei hamakom, are not coming to atone for sin. These things are helpful even when there's no sin. Because if it's to atone for sin, how does changing your name atone for sin? How does that help sort of rehabilitate the individual? Ayin Sham Baruch Aval. So that's one approach. So one approach is that Shinei Hashem and Shinei Makom are a metaphysical phenomenon that has nothing to do with the psychological rehabilitation of the individual. That's the one approach, and that Maharsha says that would explain why in our liturgy we don't have Shinei Makom and Shinei Hashem, Because what we're interested in emphasizing in the liturgy on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur is tshuva, tefillah, tzedakah, things that can help rehabilitate us from sin. So that's one approach. Now we go to the alternate approach. He says, "Aval hasmag asin yudzayin kasav shetam b'shini Hashem klomar sha'ani acher ve'eni oso ha'isha asa oso ma'isa." He says, however, the smag seems to disagree. The smag seems to take the rational approach, that by changing your name, you're doing some kind of symbolic statement that I'm a new person, I'm a rehabilitated individual. The Chahai Kasav Haran, the Ran writes the same thing. And the Ran writes the same thing that the Rambam had written as far as what you accomplish through changing your place. By moving, you humble yourself. So there seems to be this very effective change on the individual's psyche. And therefore, it is coming for sin, according to this school of thought. And the Maharsha says, and I happen to agree with that. He says, "De'ein svara d'shini Hashem ba'alma, v'lo tzivay Hashem yisbarach yivatul hagzeira." He says, because there's no svara to say that just changing your name causes a complete change in the Gzar Din. V'yoser mizeh kasha b'shini hamakom sheyivatul hagzeira v'zulas tzivay Hashem yisbarach. He says, if Hashem didn't command you to do it, why just moving from one place to another is going to change your mazel? He says, I don't see how that should happen automatically. He says, it's one thing if Hashem tells you. Then Hashem is telling you, I'm going to change your mazel. But if I decide to pick up because I'm not happy with my mazel in place A, and I'm going to move to place B, is that a reason why Hashem should conform to my wishes and change my mazel? He says, I don't understand. He says, the imkain Sarah lama lo nishtana gezei rasa b'shinei makomo at sheshina shema b'tziva Hashem yisbarach. He says, and I'll prove it to you. Sarah moved with Avraham, right? Was she granted a child in the schus of moving from Ur Kasdim to Eretz Canaan? No, she had to change her name. So you see that for Avraham, the thing that caused him to be able to have a child is the Shinui Makom, and for Sarah was Shinui Hashem, even though both of them moved and both of them changed their names. So you see that it's not up to the individual to decide I'm going to change my place or change my name. It's up only when Hashem tells you does it have that effect. And therefore I'd like to hold on to at least the opinion of the rational approach of the Smag and the Ran. That when a person is granted a new name, just like when Sarai's name was changed to Sarah, Yachshov af shebisara nishtana mazala al yedei shinoi shema lefi shelo haya shum shem shelo haya sham shum ma'akev ki lo haya ba shum chet. He says the reason why Sarah's mazel changed was because there was nothing preventing her from having a child except her mazel. And therefore Hashem says, you change your name so that your mazel will change. Aval ani shechatasi mayol bishini shemi bahara shemi lemazel acher shareachet ma'akev bi. But if I change my name, how in the world is that going to change my mazel? Because the whole thing that's causing my mazel to be bad is my behavior, not the fact that I have a specific name. So the Maharsha says that if I choose to change my name in order to change my mazel for the better, in order to avert the Gzar Din, it has to be with the attitude that I'm doing tshuva together with the Shinui HaShem. V'ayedei kein yosem el libo lashuv b'tshuva shalema v'shurotza leha osos ish acher v'tzarech ani l'takein ma'asai v'chein tefaresh anyan b'shinui makom me'avraham. And therefore, it has to be with the attitude that I want to do tshuva. I want to become a better person. I want to be a different person from the person that I was before. So the Maharsha seems to be finally siding with the rational school, even though he says that there are times when a person's mazel changes through Shinui Hashem and Shinui Makom, but it only works if you know that that's the Ratzon Hashem. If you're a Navi, and a Navi comes to you and tells you, okay, change your name, so then you know that your mazel will change. But you can't just pick up one day and say, okay, I'll change my name to change my mazel. It doesn't work that way. So clearly you see that there are two attitudes to this whole thing. One is that we can sort of manipulate the metaphysical realm and the Gzar Din through doing certain actions which are not rationally related to what I deserve to get. And the other school says, no, it's all about tshuva. Okay? Now,
How would we categorize the name change for Yaakov Avinu?
It would be the same thing. Hashem told him, change your name. V'lo yikarei od shemo shemcha Yaakov ki im Yisrael yeh shemecha.
But that's an outcome. Right?
What's that?
Like, how do I express it? Like it's like correlative, but it's not causative. You know what I mean? It's like he was Yisrael because he was the father of what does the word mean? Yisrael means he.
Because you struggled with God and with man, and you were successful. Kisarisa, in Elokim v'Yamanoshim Atuchal.
So how does that? What was the outcome of that change of name?
The outcome is that he was able to, to complete his destiny, even though he had already sired the majority of the Shvatim. But nevertheless, Hashem wanted him to have this new name in order to realize his destiny as the father of not just his children, but of Bnei Israel. Okay. So,
he wanted him.
In the you know what? Let's put that on the side because I want to go a little bit further.
Sure.
It's okay. Shulchan Aruch. Paskins in Hilchas Bikur Cholim in Yoredeya, the Ramah says, we'll just read from the Ramah. Yesh omrim shemisha yesh lo chola beveso yelech etzel chacham shabir sheyivakesh olav rachamim. So the first thing that the Ramah says is that if someone chas v'shalom is sick, you should go get a bracha from a chacham to have that person daven for you. So there is something to be said about going to a tzaddik to have him daven, right? There is something, yeah. It's brought in the Shulchan Aruch. And then, v'chei nohagu levarei cholim beveis hakneses likro lahem shem chadash. And then there's also a minhag to bless the sick in the synagogue, to give them a new name. Shinui HaShem Ceremony Gizardino, because changing the name changes the Gizardin. The Ramah does not make this dependent upon the person, the Chayla, knowing about it. It's not dependent upon the Chayla having a broken heart when he hears that he's got a new name and that he's a different person. Mm-hmm. For the Ramah, it seems to be a metaphysical phenomenon. Now, the reason why I think it's important to frame this properly is because this can be taken to extremes. And really, the reason why I want to frame it in the sense of there's this tension among the poskim as to whether it's metaphysical or rational is because it seems that is why the tradition has developed over the centuries to use this procedure sparingly. So as I mentioned before, we only do it for a chayla, and he's got to be a chayla misukan, a dangerously ill person, and realize that that from one perspective at least, there's the primary benefit is rational, but from another perspective, there's a metaphysical aspect as well. There is I don't remember even how I found this. There's a kuntris called Or Yisrael. It's published to this day, I believe. And there's a Rav in Eretz Yisrael in Bnei Brak. He's a Rebbe in Yeshivas Chug Sam Sofer in Bnei Brak. He wrote an essay. His name is Rav Shmuel Eliezer Stern, and he wrote an essay about the whole minhag of Shinui HaShem. So we're just coming into the middle of it, because really he questions the whole premise. Why is it only for sick people? Any person who has bad luck, person doesn't have mazel in business. He hasn't been able to find the shidduch. She hasn't been able to find the shidduch yet. Let her do a Shinui HaShem, right? She'll get new mazel, right? She'll be able to find the shidduch now. Or a couple hasn't been able to successfully have children, God forbid. So let them do Shinui HaShem. They'll be, yeah.
But does it necessarily mean that their muzzle is going to get better? It will change, but it could potentially get worse.
Okay, all right, good. That's possible too. But sometimes a person may think it can't get any worse, right? And then who knows? But that's a very valid point, and I want to come back to that in just a second.
They do that in the business school. The guy goes Mechora, he starts
all over again. He's right. He changes his name. Very good. Yeah, that's right. That's right. Can you help such a person? Can you legally change their name? Right? I think lawyers can do that, right? Anyway, so let's take a look what Rabbi Stern says. He says, V'achein, in source 10, we're coming into the middle of the essay. He says, V'achein kacha yemekubal eitzel kol gedolei hadoros b'chol hatekufos hashonos shelo hayu mishanim shemos hanashim benashim ela b'shas sakana muchashit hame'ayemet al chayei hacholeh. That the tradition among all of our Gedolei Yisrael throughout the generations was only to do the protocol of Shinui HaShem unless you were dealing with a person who was imminently dangerously sick. V'chein mashma b'shut maharam halava hanal shekatav sham ru'uvein chalav enatalamus. One of the Sephardish early Shalos and Shuvas Sfarim writes that if a Reuven got sick and he was imminently going to die, in other words, this was really a deathly threat. The Shinui HaShem b'haskamas beis din ha'elyon, they changed his name with the consent of the higher Beis Din, which is not clear to me whether that means the heavenly Beis Din or whether it means just the higher Beis Din of the region. It sounds like it's probably with the higher Beis Din, in other words, the larger magistrate of the Beis Din HaGadol. Ubasara, and they used a minyan, ubishofaros, and they used shofros, which we don't do anymore today. Kamosha nohagu, as is the minhag. Uchamochein muva uvda dahabi eitzel moran hachsam sofer zeya be'esa shechala eschol yoha acharon. That there's a story brought down about the Chassam Sofer, that when he was sick in his final days, lo hiskim sheyishanu eshemo adasher mamish kolu kol hakitzin uviyamim ha'achronim hosifo lo shem. That it was only at the very, very end, after like all, everything had been tried, and this was really, he was at death's door. So then he finally consented that you can change my name to Yitzchak Moshe instead of just Moshe. Uchadisa b'sefer Aleph Kosav lahagri vice, right? V'yadua sherabim nimnu mikach mishum shaladaitim lav kol adam roi lasok b'davar zeh v'lo kol harotza lito les Hashem yavo v'yitol. And it's also known that many people in general refrain from doing this at all. There's some communities and some Rabbanim who will not do Shinui HaShem bichlal under any circumstances, because there's a phrase in Chazal that lo kol harotza litol Hashem yavo v'yitol. Not everyone who wants to use God's name can use it. It's really used in the context of a person dabbling into magic by using Shemos of Hashem. But we're using sort of like a catchphrase, a play on words to say not everyone who wants to change a name can change a name. Before we go any further in this essay, take a look at the final source number 14 on page 4. And this is quoted from the Sefer Ber Mayim Chaim, which is a very famous Hasidic Pirush al HaTorah from one of the early Talmidim of the Besht, Reb Chaim Mi Chernovich. And he writes, he dies in 1813. You're familiar with that, Ari? Anyway, so it's a very famous Sefer Ber Mayim Chaim, and he writes as follows. He talks, here it's on Parshas Bereshis, and he's talking about how Adam Harishon called each animal by its proper name. Right? So the Ikar Kriya Shemo Shel Adam Haya Hakol Lenefesh Chaya, that the pasuk talks about Nefesh Chaya Hu Shemo, that Adam was able to penetrate into the actual soul, the spiritual essence of each and every species, to give it its proper name that was appropriate for that particular species of soul. Kolomar La'erech HaNefesh Shabo Sheshem Zehu Chiyuso. A name is associated with the life force of the creature. So therefore, Adam was able to recognize the life force of every species of animal, and he called the animal by the name that would connect and resonate with that animal's life force, whatever that means. Okay? So, Ve'alkein shamati mipi admor, Nezer Yisrael Kedusha, or Olam HaMeforsam Oreino Yichil Michal Zecher Tzadek V'Kadosh Livracha. So one of the great Hasidic Rebbes of the early Hasidic masters, Shamar Befeirush, he told me explicitly, Shechalila L'shano Shem Adam HaChoyle, that a person should never do a Shinui HaShem for a sick person, Imlo Adam Shekol Ma'asav Kimat Beruach HaKodesh. Unless this person really has almost everything that he does is done with Ruach HaKodesh. In other words, he's a Heilige Yid, and therefore he is able to connect with the essence of the person who's sick. He knows the person, and he's able to sort of have some kind of penetrating gaze into that person's soul to know what name is going to be fitting for that person's life force. Ki shem hanikra la'adam be'es hivoldo, vadai rubo kekulo mizdamen me'es HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He says, because in almost all situations, the name that is given to you when you were born is the name that is like we know parents are granted like a mini prophecy to know to give their child the proper name when the child is born. Ba'asher hu shmo l'mayla v'hu chiyuso shalom. So therefore the name was given to you from above. It represents your life force. Kol yamav kasher hu chay al pnei adama, for your entire life. V'hinei hachoyle v'adai tzorach lechizuk b'yoser. Now we know that a chola needs to be strengthened, right? And sometimes the only thing that's letting him hang on to life by a thread is the strength that he gets from that association to the name which connects to his life force that was given to him by his parents. V'im okrin oso kederch sha'omrin u'me'ata lo Yaakov yukari od shimcha. And if we uproot that name that was given to him by his parents, and we give him a totally new name, and we uproot that name that was connected to his life force, v'Hashem hasheni efshar kilo michiyusohu v'nifshar below machzik hachiyus shalo. And it could turn out that we'll actually make things worse, because we'll sort of sever the thing that was letting him hang on to life, which was the name to begin with. So that's where the minhag comes to use this with extreme reticence, with extreme reservation, that you only use it in the most extreme cases. And I think also sometimes you have to know the mentality of the family of the chayla as well. Now, this is sort of like the fifth chaylik of Shulchan Aruch, where when would it be appropriate to do Shinui HaShem if the family is calling me, right, and saying, Rahman al-Itzlan, in a situation where the person is deathly ill, and there's a feeling within the family that I heard from the Mikubal that this is going to help. Okay, so then we'll do Shinui HaShem. If the family is a Maimonidean family, right, then perhaps we would take a different approach. You have to really use Chochmah in sort of determining when it would be appropriate to use this ceremony and not. But when you read something like this from the Ber Mayim Chaim, you see that you could potentially do more damage than good by doing a Shinui HaShem ceremony.
But that's if you're changing a name. If you're adding a name, in principle, he's holding on to the name you got at first.
Possibly. I don't know. I'm not.
Why they did it.
And that could also be the reason why. Yeah. But again, I have to tell you that if a person's well versed in the metaphysical realm, then I would say, listen, if you know what you're doing, gesundheit hate. It's like. The first rule of medicine is do no harm, right? So if I'm not sure what I'm doing exactly by Shinui HaShem, because ein lanu esek b'nistaros, I would be very hesitant even to add a name unless I felt confident that this was the right thing to do. Let's continue on in this essay from Rav Stern, going back to source number 10. He talks about a new phenomenon that has arisen in Eretz Yisrael. He says in paragraph Tesvav, he says, "V'hinei yesh b'tekufa ha'achrona ka'ilu shebodkim eshemoseim shel b'nei hazug va'osim cheshbonos mesuyamim." He says what happens sometimes is they rent a shidduch for a young man and a young lady, and they go to a mekubal, and the guy says, "Well, what's your name?" And then, "What's your name?" And let's got to think about it, and we'll see if the names are matimim, if the names are work for each other. The im ein hacheshbon matim harehim matzian ki yad Hashem atoiva aleim lahosif shemos leisha leisha b'chdei shecheshbon Hashemos yatim. He says the gematrias don't exactly work out, so in order for the shidduch to go through, we have to change the name. We're going to add a name either for the boy, add a name for the girl, so that you'll have mazel in the shidduch. This apparently is a new phenomenon that goes on today in Eretz Yisrael. Have you ever heard of this?
Yeah.
You've heard of this happening?
No. Yeah.
Okay. All right, good. So, are you pro or con?
Not pro.
Okay. So anyway, he says, "V'hinei ein lehis aleim ki matzasi mekor kadum le'echad bin hacheshbonos hahem v'hu b'chsav yad sefer ha'orchos chayim leharav milunil." He says the truth of the matter is that I'm not going to lie to you. There is such a makor for this idea of having the names of the chassan and kala work out numerologically in an appropriate fashion. He says we'll just skip the brackets. Ach milvad ma sherabim v'tovim lo nahagu me'olam lahakbid b'davar zeh. He says, but besides that one source, number one, we never find in any other generation that previous generations ever dabbled in this kind of magical stuff. But besides that, uman de lo kapid lo kapdinin bahadei. The Gemara, as the Gemara says, if you're not makbid on these supernatural things, then from that min hashamayim, they're not going to be makbid. You're not going to have adverse mazel. He says, "V'sha'alti bizmano es agrach Kanievsky shlita al kach." V'heshivani, he says, I once asked Rav Kanievsky, Rav Chaim Kanievsky, about this, whether it's appropriate to do these kinds of gematria cheshbonos to see if the chassid and kal are compatible. And he says, "V'heshivani ki cheshbonos Elohim shtusim v'havolim." He says that these things are shtus v'hevel. It's just utter absolute nonsense. The Aviv Morin Balakilos Yankiv Zatzal Hayaloid V'Soichek Al Kach. He says the Steipler Gaon, his father, used to ridicule and laugh about these things. V'yoda uvda dahava be'avuha shehiter lahem lihinasei v'akol hisnahel l'meisharin. And there was once the Steipler, the couple came to the Steipler up in arms that our names are not matim, the gematria doesn't work out. And the Steipler just says, don't waste my time. And he told him to go ahead and get married, and everything worked out fine. He says, "Ula mafilu lefi oso hamakar sheviksavya." But he says, even going back to the Rav Miluniel, he says, even according to that shita, lo niskar sham hapitaron shel Shinui HaShem. There, that early Acharon did not suggest doing a Shinui HaShem in that situation. Elahu begeder siman leida mirosh ech lahachlit. He says that was a situation where the Rav said you can use the names to determine whether it's a good shidduch or not. Whether you should be mavatal the shidduch, not to change the names in order to keep the shidduch. He says, and there's also such a thing as far as, when you want to engage in a business endeavor, sometimes you go to a makubal and he'll tell you, let's look at the gematria, let's look at the dates. So that's a question of, should I engage in that or not? But to be so cavalierly go ahead and do Shinui HaShem in order to keep the shidduch, that there's no source for it at all in any of the Sfarim. And all you see from there is that it's up to you. If you feel that the gematrias don't work, so then don't marry the girl. Or you can have bitachon in Hashem that despite the bad gematrias, everything will work out fine. But to change the name, there's no heter for this. There's no makar for this. Just flippantly change the name because the gematrias don't work out, the cheshbonos don't work out. He says, and in Os Tes Zayin, he says, "V'hinei afilu ilu yahivna, diyesh be'emes mikrim misuyam," or I'm not sure, mistavir delo gora mishar sakana shel choli, or be'emes mikrim. I'm not sure what that word is. He says there are other situations when either for illness or for people who haven't yet had a child, right? They want to change their name. He says, even though there may be situations where you could argue that changing the name is efficacious, he says, nevertheless, mikol makom kol zehu davka im osim uvemitzayim es hashino kedas Moshe v'Yisrael. But then you'd have to do everything according kedasu chidin to do the Shinui HaShem. According to all of the rules and all of the very nitty-gritty halacha, what you'd have to do, if you do end up doing this ceremony of Shinui HaShem either for a shidduch or for children or things like that, is that you'd have to do it, you'd have to pull out all the stops, you'd have to publicize that you have a new name, You have to make sure that people know you by your new name and call you by your new name. ומלבד זה, באינן שתחילה יוחזק שמו החדש במשך 30 יום, וכפי שנסבר בארוחה בסייעתא דשמיא בסדר כסובה כהלכסה. That Shavive Eish Chelik Rishon Smidalos Dalit. He says you have to also wait 30 days in order for the name to sort of catch on and to gain some sense of permanence. אך יש הרבה שאין מקפידים בדברים אלו, וכתוצאה מכך נגרמים קלקולים וביos בכשרוס הכסובה וכן כסיבס הגט רחמנא ליצלן ובדברים נוספים. He says, but the truth is that sort of almost like Yatsa Scharo Behefsedo, by cavalierly allowing people to change their names, even if they do everything kedasu chedin, it's going to cause other kilkulim, it's going to cause other things that are going to be damaged in the course of knowing the identity of the person in the ksuva, knowing the identity of the person in the get, like we talked about before. And essentially he's saying it's not worth it. He says, Yud Ches, umikol holein tami dilael ein ruach hachamim noicha mishini hashemos, shiragilam bahem kehayom. He says, and that's why nowadays the Chachamim are not happy with people who do a Shinui HaShem just for the sake of a shidduch. V'chafi sheshamati kama v'kama pa'amim mamarin bal shevet halevi shlita v'kachi gam daito. I think that's Rav Vosner, and he says that's also the gam hi gam daito hagdola shel Rabbeinu Hagon Rav Yoshev ber Elyashiv shlita. Rav Elyashiv said the same thing. Ve'en laso shinoi b'shem ha'isha o ha'isha el api ha'ras gedolei Torah v'yira muvhakim v'sulomid. You should only change the name under the guidance and supervision of someone who's really, really well versed in these halachas and really knows what they're doing. It has to be really a Heilager Yid, who really, like we saw from the Ber Mayim Chaim, has to really understand what's going on over here. We won't have a chance to see the tshuva from the Sitz Eliezer, but he's had a very, I'll just speak it out very briefly and then we'll be done. Very interesting tshuva. A guy the person asking the shaila must be a Rav in Chutz La'aretz. He says, I have a balabas who grew up in a conservative shul. And when he got his Jewish name, he was given a name. He was named after two aunts, so they called him Chaya Toiba, which is a woman's name. And he says he's only been called up once in his life to the Torah at his bar mitzvah, and now he's become a Baal Tshuva. He doesn't want to be called up to the Torah as Chaya Toiba. So what should he do? And he wants to get a new name. So is he allowed to do a Shinui HaShem because he doesn't want to be known as a boy named Sue, like in the Johnny Cash song, right? So what should he do? That was the question.
To fight his way through.
So the Tzitz Eliezer paskins that he says it's okay. He says because the whole idea, this guy's a Baal Tshuva to begin with, right? And the whole issue of being a Baal Tshuva is to say I'm not the same guy. That I'm not Sue. I'm Chaim Yankel now. And as a result, he says for such a person, that's even a greater signification of the fact that he is a new person. He's a Baal Tshuva. And so he suggests that you should call him up to the Torah by his new name, and then make a mishaberach for him that, like we make for a newborn child, v'yikarei shmo b'Yisrael, so-and-so ben Ploni, give him his new Hebrew name, so that you make a public declaration that this is this fellow's name, and under those circumstances he feels that it's legitimate. So we have to know how to apply these things. This happens a lot, let's say, when people immigrated from Russia, and they never got a Jewish name. Or if a person is a Baal Tshuva, it's very common here, a very common situation you run into all the time. In Kiruv, a guy, got some kind of really weird Hebrew name. We were speaking once to the elder Rebbetzin Neuberger, Aleh Shalom. She said when she was a teacher in Baltimore in the old days, she had a student whose name was Esav. And so when she asked the mother, he said, what kind of name is Esav? She said, well, it's a biblical name, isn't it? So what's the problem? What?
Dasan. I know someone named Dasan.
Dasan, yeah. It's Dosan maybe, but yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, there are situations where Shinui HaShem is appropriate, but we have to know how to apply it. We have to know how to apply it sparingly. We have to also realize that there are things that go on in Shemayim that unless we really hold in cup and know how to tap into these things, we shouldn't flippantly be so quick to do a Shinui HaShem. Yes?
This last thing, does he have to make the name similar to his name, or do you take any name?
He doesn't specify. He says the question was, he was called Chayatoba, and now he wants to be Chaim Yoina, right? So he says, it says Lamashal. He says Lamashal.
Hold on. Taup is a dav in Yiddish. So
Yeah.
it makes sense. Yoda.
Okay.
Yeah, right, okay, yeah.
There's another situation which I hear in certain places it's a big issue, and that is sometimes a shidduch starts, and it turns out that the boy's name is the same as the girl's father.
Let's say my father's name is Leonard, right? So if my father's daughter would marry a guy whose name was Leonard also, she'd call him Lenny or Len. Something that, in other words, you change, that would be okay, as long as it's use a kinoi that's different from the father's name. But that, these are things, for some people, where if you're holding in shidduchim and you're holding in you're not going to see the boy until 5 minutes before the chuppah anyway, so then you can afford to say, okay, name's wrong, let's go to the next one. But that's not how, in our circles, that's not how shidduchim operate. They work on compatibility. They work on kiruv levavot. The people.
No, but I've heard where people don't even read the shidduch because the name of the boy is the same.
Yeah. So if someone were to ask me that question, I would tell them, I would be like the Stifler.